9th of May, 2000. Glasgow's Maryhill estate, the top floor of an 8-story tower block on Carsbridge Drive. A man waits in the shadows, rifle already in position. The spot he's chosen is normally used by residents to hang their washing. Drying lines strung between concrete posts, bedsheets flapping in the evening wind. But tonight, this rooftop has a different purpose. Through the telescopic sight, he can see everything. The street below, the tenement flats directly opposite, the ground floor entrance at number 43 Guthrie Street. He's been here since just before 9 p.m. Patient, controlled. Now he just needs his target to come home. A few minutes later, a van pulls up on nearby Kelvindale Road. A man gets out, stocky, powerfully built, and begins walking the 20 yards toward his front door. Frank McPhie is almost home. The sniper doesn't rush. He adjusts for distance, for the fading light, for the slight breeze that might nudge the bullet a fraction left or right. One shot. That's all he'll need. McPhie reaches the pavement outside his flat. His 11-year-old son is playing nearby, close enough to see everything. The trigger is squeezed. A single crack splits the evening air. Frank McPhie falls, shot once through the head. Pinpoint accuracy. Death is instantaneous. His wife hears the shot from inside their ground floor flat and rushes out, desperate to help. But there's nothing she can do. Her husband is already gone. The killer doesn't run. He leaves the rifle behind. A Czech-made CZ Berno, one of the most accurate weapons available, favored by terrorist snipers and legally by farmers for pest control. The IRA was once thought to have stockpiled dozens of these rifles in hidden dumps across Ireland. This one has just delivered an execution-style killing in a public housing estate, in full view of windows, in earshot of families eating dinner. The gunman calmly walks away. He may even have passed the neighbors, now gathering around McPhie's body, lying motionless on the ground. No one stops him. No one sees him. No one speaks. Within minutes, he's vanished, absorbed into the streets of Maryhill as if he'd never been there at all. The murder weapon sits on the rooftop, abandoned. Police will recover it, photograph it, test it for DNA. They'll find a single profile, belonging to one of their own forensic scientists. A dead end. 24 years later, no one has ever been convicted of Frank McPhie's murder. The killer left the weapon behind, fired in plain sight, and walked away free. How? If careful, UK-focused crime reporting matters to you, a quick subscribe to UK True Crime Files helps us cover more cases like this one, responsibly and thoroughly. We don't sensationalize. Maryhill, North Glasgow. A working-class estate of tower blocks and tenement flats, tight-knit streets where everyone knows everyone, and most people mind their own business. Frank McPhie lived on Guthrie Street, ground floor, his front door barely 20 yards from where he parked his van that night. The sniper had fired from the top of a tower block on Carsbridge Drive, directly opposite. Close range for a rifle with a telescopic sight. Impossible to miss. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was planned, deliberate, and executed with chilling precision. The murder shocked the geography of Maryhill, if not its people. A gunman on a rooftop, a single shot in a public space. There could have been crossfire, stray bullets, innocent residents caught in the violence. But the police officers tasked with investigating Frank McPhie's death, they weren't surprised. Not one of them. Because in their world, McPhie's murder wasn't a question of if, it was always a question of when. What did surprise them, though, was what happened next. Or rather, what didn't happen. No one came forward. A photo fit of a possible suspect seen in the area that evening was released to the public. Ignored. Appeals for witnesses were broadcast across Glasgow. Silence. Detective Graham Vance, leading the investigation, didn't mince his words. "I am bitterly disappointed," he said, "at the poor response from the public and the local community. But disappointment doesn't solve murders, and in Maryhill, the silence wasn't apathy, it was relief. Frank McPhie had lived by violence for decades, and most of his neighbors were simply glad he was gone. One local resident, speaking off the record years later, put it plainly. No one was mourning Frank. The community had closed ranks, not to protect the killer, but because they didn't want McPhie back in any form, not even as a murder victim deserving justice. So the investigation hit a wall. No forensic breakthroughs, no eyewitnesses willing to talk, no CCTV that captured the gunman's face. Just a rifle, a body, and a city that had already moved on. But 6 weeks earlier, police had tried to warn Frank McPhie that this was coming. He didn't listen. 6 weeks before Frank McPhie was shot dead on his own doorstep, Detective Sergeant Jerry Gallagher stood inside McPhie's ground floor flat in Guthrie Street. It was a short drive from Maryhill Police Office. He was there to deliver what's known as an Iceman warning, a formal threat to life notice. These warnings are issued when police have credible intelligence that violence is being planned against someone. It doesn't matter if that someone is a criminal. If the threat is real, the warning is given. DS Gallagher knew McPhie by reputation, like most officers in Glasgow. Violent, feared, unpredictable. But this was his first face-to-face meeting. Years later, in an interview with the Glasgow Times, Gallagher recalled the encounter in vivid detail. He was not tall, Gallagher said, but he was powerfully and stockily built. He bristled with aggression. But it was his eyes that told you everything. They held neither warmth nor humor. The detective delivered the warning clearly. Your life is in danger. You need to take precautions. Change your movements. Vary your routine. Be alert. McPhie's response was blunt. You've given it, he said. Now goodbye. No questions, no concern, no fear. DS Gallagher left the flat, and McPhie went back to his life as if nothing had been said. 5 months later, Gallagher would become part of the team investigating McPhie's murder. And 5 months after that, he'd help identify the prime suspect. But standing in that flat, watching McPhie dismiss the warning with cold indifference, Gallagher couldn't help but wonder. Did McPhie think he was untouchable? He'd been acquitted of 2 separate murders. He'd walked free from high-profile trials to cheering crowds. He'd faced down rivals, survived prison, and built a reputation so fearsome that even hardened criminals gave him a wide berth. Maybe, Gallagher thought later, those acquittals had given Frank McPhie a sense of invincibility, a belief that the rules didn't apply to him, that no one would dare. But someone did dare, and 6 weeks after that warning, McPhie was dead. So who was Frank McPhie? And why did someone want him dead badly enough to plan a military precision hit in broad daylight? To answer that, you need to understand the world he came from. Frank McPhie was born in Lennoxtown, just outside Glasgow, on October 21, 1948. His family moved to Edinburgh when he was 12, then relocated again to Maryhill, the area that would become his kingdom, his hunting ground, and eventually his grave. He was the only boy in a family with 5 sisters. He learned early how to fight, how to protect himself and his siblings, how to make people afraid. His mother came from an Irish traveller family, a background she'd left behind as her children grew, but the culture stayed with them. The McPhie household spoke shelter, the language of the Irish traveller community. Think Brad Pitt's character in the film Snatch, rapid fire, impenetrable to outsiders. McPhie was said to be embarrassed when his mother spoke it in front of his friends, but the travelling heritage gave him something else: contacts. By the early 1970s, McPhie was moving in serious circles. He became associated with Arthur Thompson Sr., Glasgow's original godfather. a man whose name still carries weight decades after his death. Thompson controlled large swathes of the city's underworld, and if you were in his orbit, you were either useful or expendable. McPhie was useful. He had something Thompson valued: the ability to inflict extreme levels of violence without hesitation, and connections that stretched beyond Glasgow. McPhie travelled regularly to Ireland during this period, where it's said he had friends on both sides of the sectarian divide. Republican paramilitaries, loyalist gunmen. McPhie didn't pick sides, he built bridges, and those bridges would serve him well in the years to come. By the early 1980s, McPhie had found a legitimate front for his operations: ice cream vans. On the surface, it was a solid business. The vans did a roaring trade in Glasgow's housing estates, selling groceries, chocolate, cigarettes, things people needed after the local shops had closed for the night. But this was Glasgow in the 80s, and the ice cream trade was anything but innocent. Rival operators fought brutal turf wars over the most profitable routes. Vans were firebombed, drivers were beaten, shots were fired in the street. When a relative of McPhie's, based in Castlemilk, started having trouble with rival van owners, Frank stepped in to resolve what he called a little local difficulty. People were hurt, guns were discharged, problem solved. It was around this time that McPhie earned the nickname that would stick with him for the rest of his life: the Iceman. Some say it came from the ice cream vans. Others say it had nothing to do with dairy products and everything to do with McPhie's personality. One underworld figure, speaking years later, put it simply: he was cold as ice when working, whether it was robberies or inflicting violence on others. Not a man to be crossed under any circumstances. Frank McPhie didn't lose his temper. He didn't shout or threaten. He just acted, calmly, methodically, without remorse. And by the mid-80s, his reputation had made him one of the most feared men in Glasgow. But reputation attracts attention, and McPhie's rising profile in the criminal underworld was about to make him a target for the police. And they did have some success. 1978, convicted of robbery, sentenced to 5 years. 1986, convicted of robbery again, another 5-year stretch. 1990, charged with armed robbery, but this time acquitted. 1992, caught in a £200,000 drug deal, handed an 8-year sentence. McPhie was in and out of prison, but each time he came out, his legend grew. The ice cream vans were just the beginning, because McPhie's criminal CV was about to get much, much darker. Frank McPhie's criminal record was already extensive by the 90s, but it was what he was suspected of, rather than what he was convicted of, that cemented his reputation as one of Glasgow's most dangerous men. In September 1991, 2 underworld figures were found dead in a Ford Orion outside a pub in Shettleston. Bobby Glover and Joe Hanlon. Both had been shot, and both were believed to be responsible for the murder of Arthur Thompson Jr. just a month earlier. Arthur Thompson Sr.'s son gunned down outside his family home. The killing had sent shockwaves through Glasgow's criminal network. Now, Glover and Hanlon were dead, and the rumour mill pointed to Frank McPhie. The story, as it was told in Glasgow's underworld, went like this. McPhie had lured both men to a pub in Ballinark, in the northeast of the city. Without warning, he jumped into the back of Hanlon's Ford Orion, pressing a sawn-off shotgun into the driver's seat. "Lovely night for a drive," he's alleged to have said. McPhie ordered them to drive to an open field. When they arrived, another car pulled up. Arthur Thompson Sr. got out. Thompson Sr. walked over, shot both men, then ordered McPhie to dump the bodies. The next morning, Glover and Hanlon were discovered stuffed into the same Ford Orion, parked outside a pub they both frequented in Shettleston. The discovery was made on the day of young Arthur Thompson's funeral. Chillingly deliberate timing. McPhie was never charged with the double murder. In more recent years, The role he's alleged to have played has been attributed to another crime figure, also now dead. But the fact that rumors of McPhie's involvement persist to this day tells you everything about his fearsome reputation. As one underworld insider put it, whether he kidnapped those two men or not, Frank was one of the few at the time able and willing to carry it out. McPhie was also suspected of being involved in another world entirely, one that had nothing to do with drugs or armed robbery: dogfighting. He was said to be one of the biggest operators in Europe, training and conditioning animals, turning them into what one source called lethal fighting machines. There were even rumors that McPhie had plans to make Scotland the dogfighting capital of Europe, with himself as a major player. But it was two murder trials, not rumors, that turned Frank McPhie into a legend. The first came in 1997. McPhie had been in Perth prison the year before when a fellow inmate, William Toy, was killed. McPhie was charged with the murder. He was acquitted. The second trial came just 3 months after McPhie walked free from prison in 1997. This time, the victim was someone much closer to home: Christopher McGorry, not just a close friend. McPhie had been an usher at McGorry's wedding in Dublin just 2 weeks earlier. McGorry was found strangled in the back of his own van at the side of Douglaston Golf Club in Milngavie. It had been done by someone using their bare hands. McPhie was arrested, along with 29-year-old Colin McPhie, McGorry's best man. Both stood trial at the High Court in Glasgow in 1998. Both were cleared. As they left the court building, a crowd of 50 people cheered. To this day, no one else has stood trial or been charged with Christopher McGorry's murder. It was thought that McGorry, who owned 3 horses and had been trying to distance himself from McPhie's world, had been killed over a drugs deal gone wrong. A family member said at the time, "Chris was splitting away from them both. He didn't like the level of violence that Frank would inflict. He didn't like the way Colin was so eager to participate in that violence." McGorry had last been seen at his stables, being forced into his van by 2 men. He and his wife had only been back from their honeymoon for 3 days when he was killed. 2 murder trials, 2 acquittals, 2 crowds cheering as McPhie walked free. But this wasn't luck. This was fear. Witnesses who wouldn't talk, evidence that couldn't stick, and a man who seemed untouchable. By the time Frank McPhie parked his van on Kelvindale Road on the night of May 10, 2000, he'd survived prison, beaten 2 murder charges, and built a reputation so fearsome that even hardened criminals gave him a wide berth. He seemed invincible, but someone didn't care about his reputation. Someone didn't fear the name. Someone was planning the hit that would end the Iceman's reign. And the motive could have come from any one of a dozen enemies. McPhie had enemies. The question wasn't if someone wanted him dead, it was which enemy pulled the trigger. By the time of his murder in May 2000, Frank McPhie had crossed enough people to fill a suspect list the length of Sauchiehall Street. Police had 3 main theories, 3 possible motives, 3 directions the investigation could go. The first, revenge for Christopher McGorry. McGorry had been murdered 3 years earlier in 1997. McPhie had been acquitted of the killing, along with Colin McPhie. But acquittal doesn't mean innocence in the eyes of everyone. McGorry's family and friends may have believed McPhie was responsible, and 3 years is long enough to plan, to wait, to watch, long enough to find the right moment. The second theory, a road rage incident that spiraled into a blood feud. A few months before his death, McPhie had been involved in an altercation on Balmore Road in nearby Maryhill. The other driver wasn't just anyone. He was a young member of a notorious Glasgow crime family, a family with reach, resources, and a reputation for settling scores. The incident didn't end there. Weeks later, the same young man was ambushed outside a Chinese takeaway and stabbed. McPhie was alleged to have been one of the attackers, and, according to witnesses, he'd pulled up his mask mid-attack to let his victim know exactly who was responsible. A deliberate insult, a message. The crime family was enraged. Retaliation was threatened. McPhie, true to form, didn't hide. He turned up at the family's scrapyard in Maryhill, walked right in broad daylight, to show he wasn't afraid. It was this series of events, this escalating feud, that had prompted Detective Sergeant Gallagher to deliver the Iceman warning 6 weeks before McPhie's murder. The intelligence was credible, the threat was real, and McPhie had ignored it. The third theory, a professional hit carried out by an imported gunman. Given the precision of the shooting, the use of a CZ Brno rifle, favoured by paramilitary snipers, and McPhie's known connections in Ireland, some investigators initially wondered if the killer had been brought in from outside Glasgow. An Ulster terrorist, perhaps, someone with military training, someone who could execute a hit like this and vanish without a trace. It was a plausible theory, but in reality, the answer lay much closer to home. 3 theories, 1 killer, and police were about to get the break that pointed to the man who lived just 20 yards from McPhie's front door. For months, the investigation into Frank McPhie's murder went nowhere. A wall of silence surrounded the case. No witnesses came forward, despite the fact the shooting had happened in a densely populated housing estate at 9 p.m. on a weeknight. People had been home, they'd heard the shot. Some had even gathered around McPhie's body in the minutes after he fell, but no one was talking. The photo fit of a possible suspect, released to the public, generated no meaningful leads. Forensic teams had recovered the murder weapon from the rooftop, but the only DNA profile they found belonged to one of their own forensic scientists. A dead end wrapped in bitter irony. Detective Graham Vance and his team were running out of options. Then, several months into the inquiry, Detective Sergeant Jerry Gallagher and a colleague working the case caught a break. A small one at first, but it was enough. They discovered that the CZ Brno rifle used to kill McPhie had been fired before. Not at a person, at a telegraph pole, in a farmer's field near Kilmarnock, in Ayrshire, about 25 miles south of Glasgow. Someone had been using it for target practice, and someone had seen them. A witness came forward and gave police a name. The security around that witness was immediate and absolute. They were placed on a protection program. Their location, their new identity, even DS Gallagher, one of the lead investigators, wasn't told where they'd been moved or what name they were living under. That's how seriously police took the threat. The name the witness provided led to an arrest. A 37-year-old man from Maryhill. He was detained and charged with the murder of Frank McPhie on October 6, 2000. He appeared at Glasgow Sheriff Court. And here's the critical detail. The suspect wasn't a stranger. He wasn't an outsider brought in from Belfast or Dublin. He was a local man, a senior associate of the very crime family that McPhie had crossed in the road rage incident months earlier. The same family whose member McPhie had allegedly stabbed outside a Chinese takeaway. The same family McPhie had taunted by turning up at their scrapyard, daring them to retaliate. The pieces were falling into place. A motive, credible intelligence, a witness willing to testify, and ballistics evidence linking the suspect to the murder weapon. Police finally had their man. But having a suspect and having a conviction are two very different things. The 37-year-old man from Maryhill, arrested and charged with Frank McPhie's murder, never stood trial. The case that had seemed so promising, a suspect, a motive, a witness, ballistics linking the rifle to target practice in an Ayrshire field. It all fell apart. Here's why. The ballistics evidence placed the murder weapon in the suspect's hands at some point, but it couldn't place him on that rooftop on the night of May 10, 2000. It couldn't prove he was the one who pulled the trigger. The witness who'd come forward, the one placed under such tight protection that even the investigating officers didn't know their whereabouts. Their testimony on its own wasn't enough. Hearsay, circumstantial. Without forensic evidence directly tying the suspect to the crime scene, without eyewitnesses to the actual shooting, the Crown Prosecution Service didn't believe they could secure a conviction. And remember, the only DNA found on the rifle belonged to a police forensic scientist. Not the suspect, not McPhie, no one else. The investigation had hit the same wall it had encountered from the beginning. Silence. Detective Sergeant Jerry Gallagher, reflecting on the case years later, was blunt about what went wrong. It was a slog, he said, because of who the victim was and the family said to be behind the murder. There were not many tears being shed for Frank McPhie. The general public, understandably, do not want to get involved in these types of inquiries. The problem was that we did not have any eyewitnesses. All we had was the evidence from the farm, but that was not enough to go to trial. The reality is stark. Police knew who killed Frank McPhie. They just couldn't prove it. The suspect walked free, the witness remained in hiding, and the case went cold. But the story didn't end there. 24 years on, Frank McPhie's murder remains unsolved. Police Scotland still lists the case as open. It's reviewed periodically, occasionally when new intelligence comes in, or when advances in forensic technology offer a fresh angle. But realistically, the chances of a conviction now are slim. The witness who came forward in 2000 is still in hiding, living under a new identity somewhere in the UK. The suspect, never charged after the initial case collapsed, has never been rearrested. And the wall of silence that surrounded the investigation from the beginning, it never came down. Detective Sergeant Jerry Gallagher's assessment, years after the case went cold, remains the most honest summary of what happened. Whoever did it, he said, knew exactly what they were doing. Well planned, flawlessly executed. And that, in the end, is the story of Frank McPhie's murder. Not a whodunit, but a can't prove it. The community's response to McPhie's death was telling. There was no public mourning, no candlelit vigils, no appeals from grieving friends demanding justice. The relief was palpable. One detective, speaking off the record, put it bluntly. There were not many tears being shed for Frank McPhie. But here's the uncomfortable question that sits at the heart of this case. Does a man like Frank McPhie deserve justice? He was suspected of multiple murders, though never convicted. He'd been acquitted twice, walking free from courtrooms to cheering crowds. He'd built a reputation on violence, fear, and ruthlessness. He ignored a formal police warning that his life was in danger, because he believed no one would dare. By any measure, Frank McPhie was not an innocent man. But he was also a father of 5. His 11-year-old son watched him fall that night. His wife rushed from their flat, desperate to help, only to find him already gone. His children grew up without a father, not because of an accident or an illness, but because someone shot him in the head outside his own home. Does the manner of someone's life determine whether they deserve justice in death? It's a question the law answers clearly. Every murder victim, regardless of their history, deserves investigation, prosecution, conviction. But it's a question the community of Maryhill answered differently. They chose silence. Not out of fear, necessarily, but out of a collective decision that Frank McPhie's death was not a tragedy. It was an inevitability. And perhaps, in their eyes, a form of justice in itself. The legal reality, though, remains stark. Intelligence is not evidence. Knowing who committed a crime is not the same as proving it. And in Frank McPhie's case, the gap between those two things was insurmountable. A single bullet, a vanished killer, a suspect who walked free, and a city that chose silence over justice. If you have information about Frank McPhie's murder, no matter how small or how old, Police Scotland's cold case team is still listening. Tips can be submitted anonymously. Sometimes, even decades later, a single detail can unlock a case. If cases like this matter to you, if responsible, fact-checked reporting on UK true crime is something you value, consider subscribing to UK True Crime Files. We don't sensationalize, we don't exploit, we tell the stories that shapes and scarred Britain's communities, with respect for victims and accountability for facts. And if you know something, anything about Frank McPhie's murder or any unsolved case we cover, Police Scotland's cold case team is waiting. Anonymous tips can still make a difference, even after 24 years. Justice may be slow, but it doesn't have to be silent.